Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Ryan Dawson back on the show. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm good. I always like coming on this program.
Well, thanks for coming on. Of course, you are the host of the ANC Report. You've had some issues with your host, your web host. Is it still ANC.com?
ANCreport.com.
Okay.
It used to be ANC.report for
Okay.
a brief period, but yeah, long story.
Yeah. Okay. So ANCreport.com.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, now you've had a number of postings, and one thing is you did a lecture back in February in Sydney, Australia, called War Architects and Profiteers, and we'll talk about that. There's been some recent developments, and also you have a new a film or that you've produced, The Jewish State: How Terrorists Formed a Nation.
Yeah.
And of course,
the talk in Sydney was last December, about a year ago, and then I posted it online in February.
Okay.
So it happened before Trump's inauguration and before the incident with Michael Flynn, because I talked about Michael Flynn in that talk because he was against the war in Syria and was kind of hinting like, I can't believe that. Like, I can't believe he's been chosen. Of course, 4 days into office, he was out. So.
Yeah, and didn't he also expose the ISIS connection to NATO and at least suggested it with that leak? He
did. And well, the DIA report from 2012 completely admitted that they were, the goal was to foster a Salafist principality. And then they named the allies. They didn't have the moinker ISIS yet. It was, just like it had been called. They had Al Qaeda in Iraq, like AQI, and so they knew, and they didn't care because they were like, well, that's what the Allied powers want. Talking about the GCC and Western countries that were involved in Syria wanted to support Al Qaeda because Al Qaeda was against what they call the regime, or I would say the government of Syria, and the DIA was aware of it. And Judicial Watch got this report, and there they are saying, yep, this is likely to cause an insurgency of Al-Qaeda, and we support that. We're going to let it happen.
Which is kind of a long-standing policy, at least strategy of the Anglo-American Zionist Empire, is to actually support Islamic radicalism, fundamentalism, terrorism, to destabilize these areas, to weaken, secular, moderate governments, and you can also see it as an extension of Israeli objectives or policy with the Greater Israel Plan and the Odon-Yinon Plan, correct?
Yeah, yeah, they were the first to start using proxies, and then, of course, Al-Qaeda itself, like 9/11 Al-Qaeda, was created in Afghanistan during the 80s, during the same period that Iran-Contra was going on one side of the world. The Pakistani ISI, along with Saudi money laundering in the United States CIA, was creating Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, a bunch of foreign fighters within the Mujahideen as a proxy war against the Soviets.
And in your talk, of course, we'll get into this maybe more detail, but the importance of things like banking networks and narcotics trafficking and black budget money, these things.
Opium, yep.
And so the drug trade is a key factor in this, because keeping it illegal, keeping prices high, and maintaining these criminal networks, because this feeds the illegal arms trade, the narcotics trade, the whole industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the plausible deniability, because when ISIS has tow missiles and thousands of Toyota Hilux trucks, and how do they afford all this? The kind of equipment they have. They don't have manufacturing. You don't just go buy one at Sears or something, So they got to explain away the money, and they go, oh, it must be from the drug trade. I'm like, well, it is, but we assist them in that. And, the CIA has a huge black budget where they pay for it through, their cohorts from the cartels and selling heroin, opium base, and all these different drugs. And, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, before that, the opium wars from China and Hong Kong even, but it's always been, the way that you can pay for something off the books, because the CIA usually can't go to Congress and say, hey, can we have $1 billion to overthrow a democratically elected president in, say, Chile or something? They're going to say no. But you've got the drug trade, they can do it on their own. And you can see that, like with Terry Reid's books and things on Iran-Contra, that they really were scrambling around trying to find ways to pay for things, off the record. And they landed on narcotics trade, and working with mafias as their principal method to do that.
And books like Terry Reid's book, Compromised, or Daniel Hopsinger's Barry and the Boys, there's another lesser-known one called Bush, the CIA, the Mafia, by a guy out of Texas. I forget his name. Great book about the use of the savings and loans as money laundering operations, also being raided by organized crime and intelligence operations to fund these operations. It factored in.
The savings and loan scandal never really gets connected back to that, but it would be.
BCCI, of course, and Clark Clifford, and how this. And things like Arkansas, and the
well, BCCI did go down in the early 90s.
Yes,
which and because of that, it sort of forced them back to their old roots. That the traditional money laundering bank was Riggs for the CIA.
Yeah, Riggs. Yeah,
Riggs was reused in 9/11, which is unbelievable. And of course, what was revealed, they did get caught, but it's like, they don't share that with the public so much. The way to get around anything is just make it classified, and that's it. It's classified. It's methods and means. It never is, because every time any of these things get declassified, it would never had anything to do with methods and means. It's just something they did that was screwed up, and they didn't want anyone to know.
Yeah, just cover up the crime or incompetence, or cover criminal activity and these things. But it kind of gives a lie to this whole left-right paradigm, because if you look at MENA, you look at the operations going out of there with Colonel North and Barry Seal. This involves the Clintons and the Bushes. So it just kind of exposes the whole criminal enterprise that is, the overt political establishment. They really are managers for this criminal networks, these people, and
they don't hate each other or anything. Yeah, it's all one gang.
Mm-hmm. And that's why
they just go whatever's politically expedient. Like, this area has Democrats, let's just run one of those.
Yeah,
yeah.
And which is why the Clintons and the Bushes can collaborate on Haiti, which was just a money laundering and also a looting operation with Haiti relief and these things. But as far as we have some recent developments. I want to get your take on this the Flynn guilty plea. How he looked like perhaps the FBI entrapped him or set him up, and isn't so much a Russia story as it is an Israeli story. Do you want to get into that?
Or should be.
Or should be, yeah. Phil Jordan
Robert Perry did a great, Robert Perry from UNS, UNS.com.
Yeah.
Wrote, I think it was called The Scalping of Michael Flynn, and laid out a pretty good case that I agree with of entrapment on Flynn. Now, the motivation against Flynn is because he is against the war in Syria. Mm-hmm. But so that's all this Russia hysteria, where they say, Marsha, 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 or whatever, Russia. is a cover because they can't come out and say, well, Russia's fighting Al-Qaeda, how dare they? Because we're supposed to hate Al-Qaeda. We're supposed to be fighting ISIS. But everyone knows, wink, wink, nod, nod, that in Syria that we were constantly covertly funding ISIS. And al-Nusra Front, or al-Sham. We openly did al-Sham. They don't even deny it. But, accidentally bombing the Syrian army, and then all these gas attacks and so on. And here you got a guy in the DIA, the head of the DIA, admitting this, and even expressing doubt on the gas attack. So they're saying, we don't know, it could be a false flag. Like, that's what Michael Flynn was doing. So his hit had to roll. And so they were going to get him, and they did, immediately. However, because what he got in trouble for was not having perfect recollection. The NSA has records of everything he said to everybody. And they said he wasn't disclosing this information, although he had disclosed it, but not to their satisfaction. Which you could entrap anybody like that. Mm-hmm. And say, well, you didn't tell me everything that's in this script, because you're coming months after the fact. You know how many calls these people make and everything. But what I found hilarious and dark because I have a dark sense of humor, is at the same time that they're laying out this dragnet on Michael Flynn about his calls, it was wide enough that they caught Israel up in the mix, because one of the first thing he pled guilty to was being pressured by Kushner via Netanyahu, goes all the way back to the Prime Minister, and that was in the New York Times, to call everybody on the Security Council and pressure them to vote down this resolution condemning Israeli settlements. Well, of course, Russia's on the Security Council, so that was one of the countries they called. So that's part of one of his calls to Russia, which is what Robert Mueller was investigating. So Flynn revealed it. It was very clever on his part.
Yeah.
I called on behalf of the Israelis.
And Kushner's family.
Against the Israelis?
Yeah. I mean, we covered the Kushners last time we talked about the criminal enterprise operating out of the New York and New Jersey Port Authority, that sort of, and the intrigues. And
yeah, I made a movie about it.
Yeah,
I called it, like, this is who's really going to do it, and they're all going to get in trouble because of Jared Kushner, like father, like son. He's going to end up in jail.
And Kushner, their family, their avid supporters, they finance illegal settlements, correct?
Yeah, Charles Kushner, and his son also, but mostly the father financed, settlements in Haifa and, well, in general, they pay for the settlements. And they do that with, the money they got through state contracting, which they got through bribery and blackmail.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, that's why the father went to jail.
Yeah.
The father went to jail for a number of reasons. He had a lot of counts on him. And Charles, I mean, he had witness tampering and that you could add to the list of, illegal campaign finance, rules that he broke. But the most, in our culture, we love a sex scandal. So one of the most interesting ones was his honey trap that went wrong, on his brother-in-law.
Yes.
Who took a hooker to the 2-star motel, Red Bull Inn, and she filmed the entire encounter. And Charles dumped $35,000 on this. I thought it was $10,000 because that's what he approached the first guys he got to procure a hooker for him. He's trying to use a middleman, and he offered him $10,000. And the middleman he chose were cops, dirty cops. And they apparently couldn't find one, or acted like they couldn't find one because they didn't want to get involved in it. So he ended up doing it himself and offered some girl $35,000, so she did it. I guess his brother-in-law must be a terrible person to look at or whatever if you gotta pay that much money for find a hooker in New Jersey, geez.
It's not a hard thing, right? to do.
He'd done it many times before, though. That was the thing. I mean, McGreevey, of course.
Yes.
A closet homosexual governor, and he was blackmailing him. He's the one that introduced him to Golan Sapel, who was an Israeli, got a 6-figure job from the governor. And that part of the story, it was kind of like Kevin Spacey. It was like, we got a governor who's given his boyfriend this huge salary and job. He has security clearance to nuclear facilities and things, and he's a foreign national, and he's set up by this hardcore Zionist that pays for Israeli settlements and yada yada. And it all went away because he goes, "Oh my gosh, I've been living as a gay man," and everyone's like, "Oh, what a hero! The governor's gay." And it was the McGreevey defense. So Spacey's doing the McGreevey defense. He's like, "Now I'm a gay man." Like, we don't care that you're gay. What we care about is you trying to fuck a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, given the history of Israeli nuclear espionage and how that factors into so many things in modern American history, just to have that overlooked is amazing to me, because the security implications of that are just immense.
I personally think that Sapel spy ring is how the Israelis stole the microwire technology. Mm-hmm. Because John Inacio, the lawyer for that case, and I talked to him for many hours, did many shows with him, and those same facilities were, because part of something microwire can do is actually direct artillery midair. Right? Mm-hmm. It's got so many uses, and the Israelis stole all the trade secrets, and so it was a mess. But it went all the way back. The time period overlaps, the places overlap, so that's what they were trying to get their hands on.
But, so what's the whole plea thing? Of course, the bigger story, because they haven't found, obviously they're looking for Russia so-called hacking or meddling in the elections, and there's been no real evidence of that, at least not to the extent that it's been, they've been accused of doing it. The whole idea of hacking, getting,
hacking
emails.
is a ridiculous thing, like hacking the election. Like, hold on a minute, you mean hacking emails?
Yeah.
Hacking the election sounds like, to the layman, like they hack the voting machines and change votes around or something.
Yeah.
There's definitely no hacking of the election. What happened was someone leaked emails that were true from Hillary Clinton to the public. And most likely it was someone who worked at the DNC or whatever, and it has nothing to do with Russia, but instead of being mad at her for doing and saying all those horrible things, they're mad at whoever told on her. And to me, it's like someone robbed someone's house, and then they got caught because someone saw them do it, and they're mad at the person that told on the thief instead of being mad at the thief. If people are mad at her because they found out what she did, maybe she shouldn't have done it.
Or exposed to the Clinton Foundation. Of course, this might factor into the strange death of one Seth Rich the summer before the election.
Murder.
Yeah. Because he was he was targeted as I think Podesta suspected him as the source of the leak, then he ends up dead not too long after, if I recall the details of that.
And his wallet was still there. He wasn't robbed. This isn't like a Chicago slum or something where people shot every day. It's very unusual, and it's not unusual if you really go back and look at the Clintons. They've murdered lots of people.
The landscape
well
is strewn
before
with
Vince
corpses,
Foster too. Like the Clintons were doing that. They've always been murdering and raping people. So yeah, it didn't shock me a bit.
Yeah, so they just like those two boys ended up dead on the railroad tracks in Mena, Arkansas, and it's just another one to throw onto the heap of corpses who got in the way of the Clintons. But as far as the Flynn thing goes, it's looking at Kushner and the fact that his family has supported Israeli settlements. They're so close to Netanyahu. And he's apparently he's the president's advisor on the Middle East, which is
on Palestine, Israel in particular. Netanyahu sleeps at the Kushner's house. He used to sleep in Jared Kushner's bed.
Yeah,
they gave him the son's bed. You're billionaires. You don't have a spare guest room for him. No, he slept in Kushner's bed. To me, that's like a little bit of a dog whistle, being like, because whenever there's a celebrity roast or whatever, and they make jokes about each other being pedophiles or closet gays or whatever, it's because they all know about each other.
Yeah.
So you're in Jared's bed, huh? Makes sense. The former president of Israel, Katz, was convicted of rape in 2011, went to jail. He got sentenced for 7 years. He was there for 5 years. He got out in 2016. Around the same time. Charles,
we have our own
news.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine if the president of another country, say Iran or anywhere, man, the UK, whatever, got convicted of rape and went to jail? That would be a big deal. Mm-hmm. The Israeli president is raping employees and sentenced in Israeli courts, so that he must have done it. Mm-hmm. No news in the U.S. about that. No big deal.
So, it was Phil Gerard. I was reading Phil Gerard's piece on it, and he said, he said it's reasonable to look at Kushner as either a de facto Israeli agent in the White House, which I don't think is too shocking if people who are aware of what's, of the agenda and who really controls things.
They always have Israeli agents, but now they're not really trying to even hide it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
you've got felons. Charles Kushner gets out of jail and brings with him 2 inmates that he met in prison to come work at his farm. The hubris, because nothing happens. Mm-hmm. And these guys just continue their illegal activities, and He's the president's son-in-law. If you listen to, what's Donald Trump's oldest son? Is it just Junior? His oldest son was saying their sister is the reason Trump bombed Syria. Was Ivanka was like, oh, the children, and that's when he did that ridiculous missile strike.
Yeah.
One and done, though. Then he left them alone, and lo and behold, a few months later, ISIS is gone. Peshmerga's gone in Iraq. They've all been defeated as soon as the U.S. quit supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
Trump cut CIA funding back in July, and then, within a matter of months, it was just a cascade of defeats for ISIS. But back in March, he lobbed those 53 cruise missiles into that T-4 air base near Palmyra, and basically just damaged the airport. It didn't do a lot of damage to planes or soldiers or anything, but that was at the behest of his daughter. Well, his daughter's Kushner's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel definitely wants to get rid of Assad. They were supporting Al-Qaeda, still are. They just shot down a helicopter recently, and they said, oh, it was the rebels. Yeah, the rebels got a guided missile? Really? Like, out of the Golan area? When Israel's been shooting that? I mean, they did it, But I think Jared Kushner could possibly get subpoenaed. I mean, he should be. It's been all over the news. It's going to be hard for them to cover this up now.
Well, I was reading Giraldi's piece on it. He said how it was reported was they referred to the intervention on the part of Flynn talking with the Russian ambassador, mentioning on a UN vote, but it was very vague. They didn't mention the country and the specifics of the vote.
Well, so, Flynn admitted the specifics because he pled guilty to doing it. So
yep. Yeah. So now, so that's. I mean, so here another thing just shows you the extent of Israeli influence in the U.S. government. You have at least I saw a new video you have coming up soon, sometime this month, called "The Jewish State: How the Terrorist State Formed a Nation."
Yeah,
very provocative.
Really necessary. I see all these debates about this stuff, and real quickly on Flynn before we move off topic there. On November 24th on ANC Report, this is back when they were talking about trying to register RT and Sputnik as a foreign agent, which felt made me fall out of my chair. But this is something else that they're now talking about, the Logan Act, and they're talking about FARA and things that Grant Smith and us have been bringing up year after year.
But what about AIPAC?
And we get the TILIP conference, and I mean Grant's written books about it, they're talking about using FARA to register RT as a foreign agent. So I wrote this article saying Russia isn't the foreign agent. Israel AIPAC needs to register as FARA. And down there at the bottom of the article, I talked about Michael Flynn. And this is before any of this, guilty plea or anything. I said that, I think that he's going to get caught up, with the Israelis are going to set him up. And, it happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They are having a hard time in the media because they built this up for like a year about Russiagate, and it's Israeligate. And everyone knows, and yet the media doesn't want to say anything bad about Israel. Hey, but they have to report what, Flynn is pleading guilty to.
Mm-hmm.
And at first they didn't. CNN and a lot of them didn't mention it. They only talked about the second guilty plea that the calls he made, and they didn't talk about him, in the UN vote. But then, and NPR didn't either. But then MSNBC and some others started to, and they kind of got forced into it. And then Trump's approval ratings go up 45%, or whatever. It's just like when he bombed Syria, they're all like, I think he's acting presidential now, when he does something stupid. And then he does this, I'm going to move the capital thing, which, every president since the 90s have said that, and they never do it.
Mm-hmm.
But, Obama said it, Clinton said it, Bush Jr. said it, Trump's saying it. And so that's now the focus. And
And obviously the symbolism matters here. I mean, Jerusalem's supposed to be sort of an international city because the three major faiths claim it, and it's outside the original borders. It was seized. It was the 6 Day War that was seized, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, they want to act like they're going back there from a 3,000-year absence or something, because mythology is history to them. And it's ridiculous, but yeah, it's important, and I get the symbolic importance of it and everything, and people are getting all bent out of shape about it, and then they're saying, oh, it'll be a year before we move the embassy, and then yesterday, oh, it'll be 2 years before we move the embassy. They're not going to move the embassy most likely, but it's still not going to be the capital. Even if we move the embassy, all the other embassies will still be in Tel Aviv. The rest of the entire planet acknowledges Tel Aviv as the capital of Israel. So the U.S. can't just change the capital by moving its embassy. It's one embassy. It just means, well, the world all has them in Tel Aviv except for the U.S., who's the only one that has it in Jerusalem. And they can't do that. But I would think that your people's energy would be better spent condemning Israel for settlers, burning babies and setting houses on fire and murdering people. And my friend was just over there, and the family he was staying with, one of the children was shot in the eye and blinded and shot through the legs, and the father's in jail. And I mean, that kind of daily abuse is what needs to be exposed, not this sort of abstract stuff about, well, are we going to call this the capital or not? They've been calling Jerusalem their capital the whole entire time. The new is and the U.S. has been saying it too. The only thing new, and Bush and the others said we were going to move the embassy too. They just didn't do it. But it's fashionable to bash on Donald Trump, so this one got some heat, and they need to distract from the fact that Israel pressured Michael Flynn to call the UNC. And Flynn's just the guy who got caught. They pressured everybody to call the Security Council to try and get him to change their vote. Yeah. He's just the one that is under investigation. If you were to look at any of the prominent figures, they definitely pressured him to call to try and get the UN to change its vote.
I mean, they're all bribed and blackmailed, one or the other, right? I mean, that's why Netanyahu gets 29 standing ovations when he addresses Congress, right?
Yeah, why is he even talking to our Congress?
Exactly.
What foreigner could you imagine that? Freaking, I don't know, North Korea or whatever. I'm thinking there's no pariah state as bad as Israel just coming in and lecturing our Congress. I mean,
yeah,
they wouldn't even let the British do that. Our tightest ally could not come in and just talk to our Congress that long and have them stand and clap like seals and be like, or give us more money. It's a clever way of stealing the tax money. They just send it to Israel, which sends it back to the private interests of the people that make the laws.
Yeah, you mentioned your friend staying with a family where their son had been shot through the eye. Who's that? She wrote Against Our Better Judgment. The author. Forget her name. Her name's failing me now. The book's called Against Our Better Judgment. It's about the decision on Palestine.
Was it Allison?
Allison Weir. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it was Allison Weir.
Yeah, I listened to her talk, and she says that's sort of what they often snipers will do is they'll shoot out the knees, the eyes of Palestinians as a way of debilitating.
Yeah, another boy got shot through both knees, sideways.
Yeah, and
a bullet you're not supposed to use, by the way, took out both his legs.
That is according to her, according to witnesses on the ground there, that's the Israeli snipers are trained to do that.
It's a sport for them. You can see videos of them on the rooftop celebrating about it, just shooting kids playing sports or whatever.
The idea is to leave them alive, but permanently disabled from the wound.
Yeah,
which is awful. The same way the blockade.
That's why I made this film. It's one of my motivations. Is how the terror state was born. Basically, I put Jewish state in scare quotes because I don't consider it a Jewish state. I can't think of anything more anti-Semitic than for this group of racists to call themselves the Jewish state, because when you do that, it seems like everything Israel does then is something the Jews agree with. And it certainly wasn't. And in the film, I give an example of a very famous Jew everyone knows, Albert Einstein, and a long list of other prominent Jews at the time period that wrote a letter to the New York Times condemning Israel and specifically calling Menachem Begin a terrorist. He was the 6th Prime Minister of Israel. He was one of these Haganah terrorists that was involved in the Patria that we were mentioning over. He's the one that gave the order to blow it up. And even, after all that, still becomes Prime Minister. But Einstein and these other prominent Jews, who are just as Jewish as the Zionists, were completely against the Likud party, which was created completely against the state of Israel, and they called it a fascist regime that was politically and organizationally completely just like the fascists of Nazi Germany that they had fled from, and would not support it at all. And that was in the New York Times. And so there was definitely a wing of anti-Zionist Jews. And so for the Zionists to call Israel the Jewish state is a slap in the face to all the sane Jews that wanted no part of that fascism and an ethnic state and ardent racism and apartheid. So that's why in my title I write Jewish state like it's not really a Jewish state. It's what they call it themselves. It's kind of like the Nazis saying the Aryan nation or something. Mm-hmm. Well, all these other white people don't agree. So.
But I guess the whole point of I haven't seen it, of course. I just saw the preview for it.
Yeah, it just came out like an hour ago, so you couldn't have seen it.
But I guess you obviously I want people to go see it, watch it, and support your work. So do that. But I imagine you're pointing out the various terrorist actions carried out by Irgun, Haganah, and the Stern Gang to sort of chase out the inhabitants of Palestine, to clear it out for the purposes of seizing it, right? I mean, that's what...
That, and also they actually attacked synagogues and Jewish targets to force immigration to Palestine, to say, oh, you'll be safe over here. But yeah, the first part of the film is about the ship bombings, mm-hmm. and not even getting to the USS Liberty yet, because that's like a whole going to be a section all on its own. In making it, I decided to make a series. But the first part covers the ship bombings, so like the Patria, because that was horrible. I mean, that was the largest terrorist attack in the 20th century. It was larger than Oklahoma City. It was larger than the King David Hotel, which was the largest attack on land, which was done by the same groups. But I mean, they bombed the Haywood. They bombed the Empire Rival. They bombed a number of ships. The Crescent and then of course the Patria. They blew up trains. They blew up hotels. They machine gunned people in villages. So there was so much terrorism by Irgun and Stern and these groups that I decided, all right, first we'll talk about all the assaults on the British and on the boats, because that gets over the illegal immigration. Because when the British would intercept a ship full of illegal immigrants, they would send them not back to Europe, but to Mauritius or one of these neutral islands, temporarily, mm-hmm. or they would keep them in a camp up in Haifa until they could be deported somewhere safely. So they couldn't bring them to Germany, until after the war. Mm-hmm. They could put them in France, so they could do it. So at first they allowed immigrants into Palestine, but because they were caught doing so many terrorist activities in Palestine and causing so many problems, they came out with the white paper of 1939, which would limit immigration to 75,000 people a year, which is pretty lenient, but no more. And so once they reached that quota, they kept turning boats around and intercepting and saying, you can't just build a country on top of a country, Mm-hmm. So the Zionist terrorists started trying to disable these boats or blow them up rather than allow Jews to leave Palestine. They'd kill them to force them to stay, and they killed a lot of British sailors. And so for me, I felt like it was a story that isn't really out there. When people talk about the conflict, they kind of brush over 48 and then they jump right to the 6-Day War. They don't talk about the war in 56 at all, and they don't talk about anything before 1948. And so this film deals with about from 1940 to 1947 just on the naval terrorism. And the next part's going to go over all the things they were doing to Palestinians, because I couldn't fit it all, all the terrorist attacks. So I thought, well, we'll see what they did to the British, who had helped them, initially, and they turned on them. And then what they did to Palestinians. And then you'll understand how the war breaks out, because the typical narrative from the Zionists is, Holocaust victims were fleeing to their God-given homeland because they were there first 3,000 years ago, although the Palestinians were also there 3,000 years ago. So even with the mythology, that excuse still doesn't work, but they're returning to their homeland, and out of the blue, all the big bad Arab states ganged up on poor little Israel for no reason, and Israel fought them off. That is the story of the war of 1948.
And of course, Hollywood kicks in with the movie Exodus.
Oh yeah. And that was one of the ships too, and then of course Exodus has biblical implications.
Yes, of course, yes. And of course, should Hollywood be forced to register as a foreign name?
Yeah. There's enough pedophiles in there.
Yeah.
It could be AIPAC. They got just as many pedophiles.
I mean, the context. What happened was now you're more familiar with the history of it than I am. I'm generally familiar with it, but of course, because of all the violence, stirred up by the Stern Gang, Haganah. The British imposed a blockade. And there was because this is the British mandate that dates back to the aftermath of the First World War. What happens is they impose a blockade. There's an arms embargo, which is violated by Jewish agents here in the United States, like Meyer Lansky, Greenspun in Las Vegas, and many Hollywood notables. Correct?
And the leader of the Jewish agency was Ben Gurion, who becomes the first prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
And the leader of, and the second in command becomes the second prime minister, and so on. And then, Begin was in there, and he becomes the sixth prime minister. And so a lot of these guys got their start. Yitzhak, both of them. They were, Shamir and what is it, Rekid, whatever he's, he was in Irgun, so.
And there was like a really lucrative illegal arms trade going on in the United States. A lot of surplus, World War II surplus material that
Yeah, Charlie Winters and then, of course, you had the New Mex scandal and Zalman Shapiro and all that was happening. They also set up this company called TAS, which was at first, like talking about the early days, where they were smuggling dynamite into Palestine. And that was sort of the crude way they were blowing things up with dynamite. But then they got professional arms smugglers as they evolved. And a lot of American Jews willingly, ideologically, were in line with this idea and helped smuggle, heavy machinery like bombers, everything like planes and things to Israel in anticipation for this war that they planned to start in 1948 and did, which they blame on the Arabs. But that's what they constantly do. They constantly blame the victims. Even when they blew up the Patriot, they said, well, we were just trying to disable it. We weren't really trying to sink it. Because the British could use that to say, we're hurting the war effort. I'm like, not because you murdered 200 people, because it was bad PR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that happens today. They complained about the war in Lebanon in 2006. They went over all the bad PR, the mistakes they had made, because, why they're so against cell phones and stuff in the West Bank. Is because it's bad for public relations. And as another friend of mine who was over there said, only one side fears the camera. And that's the Israeli side. Palestinians don't care if you film them.
Mm-hmm.
They're happy when they see a camera because they think, wow, some Westerner might tell our side of the story. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Meyer Lansky, for people who don't know who are listening, was the kind of the brain of the New York Mafia Syndicate, which it's called, they say New York, but really it had expanded greatly into Florida at that point. during the real estate boom, trying to go legit. But mainly because Florida was geographically next to the all the imports from Cuba that were coming in, and the gambling operations they had, which ended up getting shut down when Fidel came in. But that they completely connected with the Israelis, and the entire Jewish mafia in the United States now had state sponsorship, and really went to another level by having. And the same thing happened with the Italian mafia, which, you know, Hollywood focuses exclusively on.
Yes.
Is they had state sponsorship because a lot of the Sicilians and stuff that the U.S. had supported during World War II, sort of the enemy is my friend, because they were a power rival to Mussolini, so he really cracked down on them. But they put like Giavessi in charge, and Doug Valentine's written about this. Mayors, governors, the high level positions in the post-World War II Italy had been handed over to members of the mob. And so they were able to expand operations in the United States like never before after World War II. Also, World War II gave great conditions for black markets where the mafia thrives in, prostitution, drugs, and so on, because so many cities have been decimated and so many people were desperate. What do men do when they need money and they don't have food and our job? They sell drugs. And what do women do? They sell themselves. And who runs those operations? Organized crime.
Human misery is a business plan.
Yeah, and they made billions from it. I mean, that's
we see it
they
play
do
out
that now
today.
in Indochina, you know, in Thailand and these places. The sex trade is worth billions.
Haiti,
yeah. Oh yeah, there's a sex trade in the Caribbean. We know that.
Yeah,
they do it in planes.
And then also, I mean, there's the sex trade, illegal arms, drugs. There's also
gambling and
organ.
Gambling's still big. It's not out.
Organ smuggling, which is really disturbing, but.
Oh yeah, human trafficking, which includes body parts. That's a big deal.
I mean,
babies. You know, the wrestler Ric Flair. Everyone that knows wrestling knows Ric Flair. I suppose he was one of those babies that they told the mother that he had died, and they told the parents who adopted him that the mother had died, and sold him to this wealthy Ohio family. So he never knew his real family. That was going on. That this government was doing that, but you can't really separate government and mafia after the 60s.
Yeah, I was listening. You know, the Balkans were in the 90s. Both Wesley Clark and Madeleine Albright have cashed in on the post-war environment there. I think she's involved in some company in privatizing telecommunications, and he is involved in some sort of resource extraction, or might have that reversed. One or the other, they're both cashing in on the war they perpetrated, that they stirred up.
Well, the Bidens did that with Ukraine.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really disgusting, and in the Eastern sphere, like talking about Yakuza and triads, and which is the Yakuza is the mafia in Japan, triads in China. China, you know, after the glory of communism and starving tens of millions of people, had the same kind of conditions where workers starve and complete desperation. So, very good for the mafia there. Even easier under communism, you know, because everything's a monopoly anyway. But the Japanese Yakuza were allied with the CIA. And there's the Kodama incident of 1976, if anyone wants to read about it, if they're interested in that kind of thing. But I'm just saying it's not unique. Like the Lansky connection to Israeli organized crime and U.S. government was nothing new. They did the same thing in Japan and Italy and other places.
You're interested in sort of the Hollywood with the mafia, so either romanticizes or kind of, when you're talking about mafia, everyone thinks Sicilian or Italian mafia. Very few people.
They're not going to talk about the Jewish mafia.
The Jewish mafia, which is arguably more powerful, is of course, the Godfather series, which is, at least 2 excellent movies, 3 revelatory in many ways about how the real world works. is the story, the intrigues behind that was, of course, Robert Evans at Universal, Jewish. He was a protege of Sidney Korshak, who was this Jewish mafioso, kind of a lawyer who he was a go-between between corporations, the mob, and worked in corrupting, or at least taking over, a lot of the labor unions. So it was kind of his function. But his negotiations in getting the Godfather made, I think he's the one that got Al Pacino out of his contract to play the part in The Godfather. But there's a lot of...
The Godfather does go over, it basically mirrors some real life Italian mobsters. Yeah. But
Hyman
they
Roth,
leave out all the parts where they liaison with the Jewish mafia and the whole creation of what the stupid name Cosa Nostra or whatever. They never call themselves that, but
the RR
that's the Hollywood creation, that term even. But they leave out all that, and they leave out the state sponsorship, like Lucchese in the garment district. It's like, Jews are great at selling the garments. I'm like, well, yeah, and also it's organized crime. But these sectors, they move into real estate. And the Italians still had some gambling operations, and a lot of them, there was a really big divide. They weren't that big into narcotics. They thought it was bad. Mm-hmm. Genovese made a compromise because a lot of the lower rung mafia guys thought, this is a cash opportunity. So he said, quote unquote, just sell it to the niggers.
And that's played out in The Godfather.
Keep it out of our own area or whatever. Yeah. So.
And, but then of course the big heroin thing was Rothstein and Delansky, right?
Oh, they didn't have any qualms about selling narcotics.
Yeah.
They were moving them everywhere. That's why, Spelli was, before the Marcello brothers got hold of the Dallas territory, it was didn't really have a clear mob boss. Louisiana ended up moving, slowly in with Joe and Carlos, but, the narcotics trade was slowly becoming the cash cow. As gambling operations were being shut down, they lost their casinos. They were still in the middle of building Vegas. So all those drugs coming up from the south from Mexico, which ultimately was just a gateway for every country beneath Mexico selling cocaine, heroin, and so on, were coming into Miami and New Orleans and, of course, in Texas. Mm-hmm. And so the Southern Mafia, this new territory, became very, very valuable. And just Chicago and New York moved down south and kept the narcotics operation flowing. It helped with the business model, and the Jewish Mafia was all over that. Whereas other syndicates were having qualms about it morally, which is funny to think of today because they wouldn't care. But the New York family, Lansky, didn't care. They didn't bother with it at all. They helped with the arms trade down south too. So. And then, of course, the State Department and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics took over and professionally helped the organized crime.
That's an interesting point.
Now the CIA runs it because they swallowed up the FBN. So.
Yeah, because organized crime, at least the mafia, how we've come to understand it or how we recognize it.
It's not the Hollywood Italians. That is lowest level mob.
Yeah.
Where they're doing a shakedown protection racket or something. Pay us or we'll throw a brick through your window or something. That's not the mob. But it is, but that is not the totalness of it.
But if you look at even areas like the casino industry, the Las Vegas, Atlantic City, how it became corporate in the 70s and 80s, that also coincided with the crackdown on the breaking of what we call the traditional mob. The federal government. It doesn't really exist anymore. At least we don't think it exists anymore as it did maybe in the heyday.
Hoover denied there even was a mafia.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, they had him by the balls almost literally.
But it's gone corporate, right? I mean, the areas of drug trafficking and it's gone gambling and these things, these vices, entertainment. The mafia.
Well, real estate and contracting. They did that stupid Windows scam in New York. The Gambinos were doing this, and where they get exclusive contracts to say just do the concrete or just do one aspect of some huge building project. Trump Tower was built like that.
Yeah.
a lot of it's in real estate, and it's all corporate, and it's all quasi-legal. But they made sure the labor unions don't bother them, and they make sure that it's all nepotism and that they get contracts, that it's overappraised. They get an enormous amount of money, more than what the work is being done, and then they usually outsource the actual work to illegal immigrants and things.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see that like in The Sopranos, where they're hanging out on a work site and there's like 12 mafiosos there sitting in lawn chairs drinking beer while there's a project going on, and they're all getting paid for the project. It's all negotiated in the contracts, and for these public works.
I've never watched Sopranos, but maybe that sounds like something I would enjoy.
They even mention like HUD scandals and real estate scams, things like that.
Well, all that stuff really happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's endless, really, and that's another thing when people think about the mob. They're like, oh, yeah, it was kind of a long time ago, Al Capone and liquor running, right? Like, well, yeah, they did run liquor, but that is not the extent of the mafia. And if you want to include, say, alcohol's a drug, all right, but that's, and I mean, they rig sporting events. Even the World Series, they've gone all the way to the top, with assassinations and the things they control and rig, and it's crime.
Well, professional sports, particularly the NFL, dates back to some of these gambling mafia families, so it's a question of how much, not a question if.
Even professional baseball was started by prisoners.
Yep.
Sort of.
And it got its impetus really with gambling, and now with fantasy leagues, things like that. And I mean, if you just look at the sheer numbers, I think it's estimated that illegal gambling, informal gambling, because illegal we don't know, but it's estimated anywhere from $100 billion to $500 billion a year. And you look at all the sports, the profits for all professional sports in the United States in 1 year was $25 billion. So obviously that amount of money is going to affect the play on the field. Not to mention the fact that to the extent that professional sports is corporatized, and there's nothing illegal about a certain league choreographing or orchestrating wins to sell the brand, which I think happens all the time. I mean, it happens all the time.
They do, and this recent scandal with the Russians aren't going to have their flag in the Olympics because their own state was helping them get away with taking steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a huge whistleblower who's in hiding for his life. Was one of the doctors that figured out a way of, how to get around the tests. And eventually during the Sochi Olympics, they just stole the pee. They had some kind of bottle. It's just like glass contraption that you basically got to break it to get into it. Like if you take it off, you can't reseal it without a trace, but they made a machine that kind of tapped it a certain way to open it, and the scratches and stuff are still there where it was tampered. They replaced all the piss. I mean, they've been busted red-handed, and they're all, woe is me, but because 98% of the propaganda against Russia is baloney. But this is something they actually did.
Yeah.
And, it's really important because if you win events in the Olympics, it's national PR. You make money off of that.
Lots of money, yeah.
You get a lot of money and prestige for your country by doing that. I mean, the Jamaicans were all doping, but Usain Bolt got a lot of endorsements, a lot of tourism into Jamaica. It puts you on the map, so to speak.
It's big business.
It's big business, and it definitely has organized crime and government. Yeah. So,
Why would you... Brian Dewey wrote a book called The Fix Is In about professional sports, and he asked the question, he goes, would you... hold a multi-billion-dollar industry up to chance if you could fix it? No, of course you'd fix it. And I mean, it's entertainment. ESPN is the entertainment sports network, right?
Right.
Entertainment and sports network. It's entertainment. You're watching something on television.
WWE.
Yeah,
but they don't admit it.
I mean,
and neither did WWE till the 80s. But
people get so upset when you mention this. Yeah.
Because this was in my Trump movie, too. There was an organization called Pride. It was kind of like the UFC of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a lot of fixed fights in the sense that, I mean, they were hitting each other, and it wasn't like totally like pro wrestling, but they would approach a fighter and say, hey, we'll give you an extra $45,000 if you'll take the fall.
Yeah.
and will guarantee that you get another 2 fights or something. So they were rigging fights. Some of them were losing on purpose and things to get the cash, and they're all on drugs. Like, it was really clear. Vanderlei Silva post and pre-steroid were really, really different.
Yeah.
But these guys, you're talking about like the Patella brothers that used to run UFC, they sold it off, own casinos, you know. And these guys, I did not dig up the dirt on UFC because I like watching the UFC and I like WWE. Trump financed 2 WrestleManias for Vince McMahon, WrestleMania 4 and 5.
Trump shaved his head.
Yeah, he did. He shaved Vince's head. Trump's in the WWE Hall of Fame. He's in the WWE Hall of Fame, and Scott Steiner isn't, or whatever. But he
and electoral politics is sort of like a WWE, I think.
I mean, Trump is so. It's amazing, you know. He gets on Twitter and he says he's referring to Elizabeth Warren as Pocahontas.
Yes.
And I'm slapping the table, being like, did the president of the United States just get on Twitter and be like, Pocahontas is saying da 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 da, because she's one of these pretendians, you know? That's what I call them. We have a lot of words that people never heard of, probably, but she's a pretendian. I want a T-shirt that says, "You're not part Cherokee," because that's what everyone says to me. Oh, I might be part Cherokee. I doubt it, but he says Pocahontas is this outlandish, childish stuff. I'm like, and he's president. It's interesting and scary all at the same time.
Yeah.
But what was worse is I was like, well, still better than Hillary. You know,
that's it. Yeah. And of course, getting back to what we're talking about, you know, the mafia. Then, of course, he's comes out of the casino industry. It's Resorts International, which gets us back to Meyer Lansky.
Yeah, it does. And in the CIA's paint company.
Mary Carter, the Mary Carter Paint Company.
Mary Carter Paint Company. And, you know, Trump was sitting with Bob Labouty in the front row of WrestleMania when, Randy Savage was wrestling Hulk Hogan. And he's like, I don't even know the guy. It's like you went to WrestleMania, which you paid for, with this mobster. This is after Bob had gotten out of jail and Trump gave him a job. Gave his brother a job too. And they're flying helicopters and helping high rollers. Trump's good at plausible denial. He's never there. Trump doesn't drink even. But his brother died in a drunk driving accident. But he lets these other guys who he knows are going to do it, you know, go and bring people to Atlantic City, make sure they have a good time. But I don't want to see it. You know, I just see you guys do whatever.
Well, Jeffrey Epstein, you know, he's a fun guy to be around. He likes the girls, a little young.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, probably another Mossad opera.
I wonder if Bob Saget's ever been on his plane. I'm waiting for that shoe to drop. Hollywood's so disgusting. Like, I know some people in Hollywood from like Falling Cards and stuff. My buddy just did a film with Tara Reid, and you know, he used to be whatever, but I'm not going to comment. But
it wasn't Sharknado, was it? No.
No, it's a horror film called Ouija House. Well, she was in American Pie, and some, you know, Kevin Spacey was in some of these things. But anyway, I can tell you, and anyone around LA, I guess, knows about the casting couch and just how prominent. It's shocking when it doesn't happen, you know. They're disgusting, and they're abusing power, and there's a lot of girls who willingly will, like, all right, I'll sell it to get this position, you know.
It is a transaction element.